Ned Stark stood by the window in the Tower of the Hand, watching the sun dip behind the walls of King's Landing. The smell of the city, a mixture of smoke, sea, and sewage, drifted in with the evening breeze. Behind him the door creaked as footsteps approached, fast, heavy, urgent. It was Sir Barristan Selmy, my Lord Hand, the old knight said, voice tight with concern. "The king! He's returned from the hunt early." Ned's brow furrowed. "That's not like him. He's wounded, but alive." That sentence alone made Ned's heart jump. He grabbed his cloak and followed Sir Barristan without another word. As they moved through the Red Keep, whispers passed between servants like wildfire. The king had been gored by a boar. A hunting accident, they said. But he was still breathing, still speaking. When Ned entered the royal chamber, Robert Baratheon was lying in his bed, pale but not yet at death's door. His massive frame looked smaller now, draped in sweat-soaked sheets. Cersei was nowhere to be seen, and for once Ned was thankful for it. "Ned," Robert said, his voice gravelly, but stronger than expected. "7 hells, I've made a mess. You should rest," Ned said softly, moving to his side. "I will, but first, we talk." Robert gestured for everyone else to leave the room. Even Selmy hesitated, but obeyed. When the door shut, Robert fixed his tired eyes on Ned. "I should have listened to you from the start. About Cersei, about her children," Ned's mouth tightened. "I told you because you're my friend." Robert exhaled deeply. "And I ignored you like a damned fool. That boy Joffrey, he's not mine." "You were right. Jon Arryn tried to tell me too, and they killed him for it. They'll kill you next if I don't act." It was the first time Robert looked truly afraid, not for himself, but for his oldest friend. "I need you to stay alive, Ned, for the realm, for the North, and for our old promises." Ned felt a pit form in his stomach. "You're not dying yet." Robert chuckled, which turned into a wheezing cough. "I might not be dying today, but I won't be king for long if I keep letting vipers sleep in my bed." He reached under the bed and pulled out a sealed parchment. "My new will, I've written it already. It names you as protector of the realm until the rightful heir can rule. But this time I've named the heir. It's not Joffrey, it's Stannis. He's a cold bastard, but he's got the blood and the law." Ned opened the parchment and read the words. It was true. This time there was no room for doubt or manipulation. "I want you to send word to Stannis tonight. Tell him to return to the capital with all the speed he can manage. And one more thing," Robert grunted, lifting himself slightly. "I want Cersei and her brats out of the Red Keep by morning." Ned blinked. "You want to arrest them?" "Damn right I do. I've been blind for too long. It's time to take control of my own throne." That night the city shifted. Ned summoned Sir Barristan, Lord Renly, and a few other trusted members of the small council. He read the king's decree aloud. Cersei was to be placed under house arrest, her children taken into protective custody. The gold cloaks were ordered to guard the royal chambers and prevent any Lannister interference. Renly protested. "You'll start a war, Ned. Tywin Lannister won't take this lightly." "He's already prepared for war," Ned replied. "We're just trying to survive it." By dawn, Cersei Lannister was removed from her chambers under heavy guard. Joffrey was screaming, demanding answers, but the crown was stripped from his brow. Tommen and Myrcella cried as they were separated from their mother. And through it all, Robert Baratheon watched from his bed, silent and grim. By the next sunset, word had already reached Tywin Lannister at Harrenhal. His fury knew no limits. But Robert was alive. Ned was still the Hand, and for the first time in weeks the tide had shifted. The wolves were not dead yet. The Raven reached Harrenhal by midday. Lord Tywin Lannister crushed the letter in his hand, the royal seal cracking beneath his thick fingers. His golden eyes, cold and unforgiving, swept across the war table laid out before him. The message was brief, but its weight was colossal. Cersei arrested, Joffrey stripped of the crown, Stannis named heir, and Robert Baratheon still alive. He rose slowly, voice low and sharp. "They've made their move. Now we make ours." Kevan Lannister shifted uncomfortably. "Surely there's still room for negotiation, brother." "The king lives. He may yet see reason." Tywin turned to him, calm and dangerous. Robert Baratheon has never been a reasonable man, and now he listens to Ned Stark. That is a problem. Outside, the clamor of soldiers echoed through the halls. Harrenhal was a fortress built for war, and Tywin's host was already gathering, tens of thousands of men bearing the Lion's banner. This wasn't going to be politics anymore. Back in King's Landing, the tension was suffocating. Cersei had been confined to the Tower of the Hand, an irony not lost on her. The guards at her door did not wear Lannister red, but the gold of the City Watch, loyal for now to Robert and Ned. She sat by the window, watching the city below, her thoughts dark and racing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She waited. When the door finally opened, it was not Ned Stark but Petyr Baelish who stepped inside. He shut the door softly behind him. "You're either very brave or very foolish to visit me," Cersei said coldly. Littlefinger smiled, the same snake-like smirk he wore in council meetings. "I'm not here on behalf of the council. I'm here for myself, and for opportunity." She raised an eyebrow. "Ned Stark has the king's trust for now. But trust is fragile," he continued, "and power. Power is always for sale. You think I'd bargain with you?" she asked, voice dripping venom. "I think you're smart enough to plan your next move," he replied. "And I think you want your children safe." Cersei narrowed her eyes, but said nothing. The game was still on, even from a cage. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned sat in council with King Robert, Renly, and Ser Barristan. "Word has come from the Eyrie," Ned said, glancing at the fresh parchment in front of him. "Lisa refuses to send men. She fears war. She fears everything," Robert muttered. "Even her own damn shadow." "And Stannis?" Renly asked. "Has he responded?" "He's already boarded ships at Dragonstone. He'll land in a week," Renly shifted. "You trust him to take the throne without blood?" "He is the rightful heir," Ned replied firmly. "That is all that matters." Robert sighed heavily. "I should have named him years ago. Instead, I let Cersei fill the Red Keep with her brood like rats in a pantry." Renly leaned forward, tone sharp. "She won't go quietly. Neither will Tywin. If we don't act fast, he'll march on the capital." "We need men, Ned, now," Ned nodded. "I've already sent ravens to Winterfell. The North will stand with the king." Robert smirked faintly. "Finally. Stark and Baratheon, together again." Far to the north at Winterfell, Robb Stark stood at the gates with Maester Luwin. The raven from his father trembled slightly in his gloved hand. "My father lives?" Robb breathed, half in disbelief. "Yes," Maester Luwin said, "but he warns of war. He wants you to begin raising the banners." Robb swallowed hard. He was 17 and had never seen war, not truly. But now, his father called. His king needed the north. He looked out at the snow-covered fields. "Send word to the bannermen. Tell them the north marches." Back in King's Landing, Varys moved like a shadow between halls, gathering whispers. The Spider had seen this game play out too many times. Power-shifting hands, blood staining the stones of the Red Keep. He knew better than most that no king ruled alone. He entered Ned's chambers uninvited. "My lord," Varys said with his usual eerie calm, "there is talk in the brothels and taverns. The Lannisters are mobilizing. Gold flows to mercenaries in the city. You are watched." Ned looked up. "Or by whom?" "Everyone." Ned stood pacing. "If they make a move before Stannis arrives, we won't hold the city." "Then perhaps," Varys said, "you should not wait for Stannis to arrive." Ned stopped. "Strike first," Varys whispered, "while Robert still draws breath. While the crown still holds weight." It was not advice Ned Stark wanted to hear, but it was advice he couldn't ignore. Outside, the city simmered like a pot ready to boil. The wolves had moved, the lions were circling, and the first blood had yet to be drawn. The storm broke with steel. At sunrise, smoke rose from the western gate of King's Landing. A small garrison of city watchmen had been ambushed during patrol. 5 dead, 2 missing, and a crimson lion painted on the cobblestones in blood. It was no longer a question of if war was coming. War was here. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned stood over the city map with Renly and Ser Barristan. "They're probing," Renly said, eyes scanning the routes. "Tywin's men are already inside the city, hidden, paid off, waiting." Ned's jaw clenched. "Robert still lives. He is king. The law is on our side. Barristan frowned. Law won't hold steel back. Robert was weaker now, the wound from the boar festering despite the Meister's best efforts. He barely left his chambers. When Ned visited him, he found the king half-conscious, speaking in slurred mutters about Lyanna and old regrets. "You'll have to hold the line, Ned," he rasped. "Keep the realm from tearing itself apart." But even as Robert spoke, Ned could feel it. The crown was slipping from his fingers. In her tower, Cersei had not wept. She had not raged. She planned. Joffrey was hidden safely in Maegor's holdfast, surrounded by men loyal to House Lannister. Sir Meryn Trent of the Kingsguard stayed by his side. Tommen and Myrcella had been removed from her chambers, but not beyond her reach. When Littlefinger returned, she was ready. "You say power is always for sale," she told him, pouring herself a cup of wine. "Then here's your chance to prove it." Littlefinger listened as she laid out her offer. Gold beyond counting, titles for his house, and something more dangerous. The promise of control. The chance to mold a boy king into a puppet ruler. "You help me return Joffrey to the throne," she whispered, "and I will make you the most powerful man in Westeros. Even Ned Stark cannot offer you that." Petyr Baelish's eyes gleamed. He didn't answer then. He didn't need to. By nightfall, Varys came to Ned again. "My lord," he said softly, "the tide shifts." Ned sat alone in his solar, reading a letter from Winterfell. Robb had begun to gather the northern banners. The Umbers, the Karstarks, even the Boltons, all were riding south. "Robb is coming," Ned said quietly. "Faster than I expected." "And Tywin marches from the west," Varys replied. "We stand between lions, my lord." Ned looked up. "What would you do?" "I?" Varys smiled sadly. "I am but a whisper. But if I were you, I would not wait for the lions to bite. I would take the throne before they do." Ned's stomach turned. The idea made him sick. He did not want the throne. He had never wanted it. But the longer he hesitated, the more the walls closed in. The next morning, the small council met in haste. Only Renly, Barristan, and Maester Pycelle were present. Littlefinger was indisposed, no doubt with Cersei. Varys, as always, arrived late and said little. Renly slammed his fist on the table. "We must move now. Lock down the Red Keep, detain the boy. Seize the Iron Throne before Tywin's agents strike again." Ned was silent. "Robert's still king," Ser Barristan reminded. "He has not abdicated. There is no coup to be had." "But he's dying," Renly snapped. "You want to wait until he breathes his last? By then it will be too late." Pycelle shook his head gravely. "A sick king is still a king." Then came the knock. It was a young guard, eyes wide with panic. "There's been a breach in the dungeons. The Queen, she's escaped." Ned was on his feet at once. "Where is she now?" "We don't know." "She had help," Renly cursed under his breath. "She'll go to the boy." "Call the gold cloaks," Ned ordered. "Double the guard at every gate and hall. If they try to raise Joffrey, we put this rebellion down today." But it was already too late. In the throne room, Cersei Lannister entered with the poise of a queen, returning to her rightful place. Joffrey walked beside her, wearing a crimson cloak and an expression far too smug for a child. Sir Meryn Trant and 24 Lannister guards flanked them, and behind them came Littlefinger. Janos Slynt of the Gold Cloaks met them at the door and bowed. When Ned Stark arrived minutes later, his sword drawn, the Iron Throne was already occupied. Joffrey Baratheon sat atop it, legs swinging slightly, a golden crown resting on his head. "I am king now," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And traitors shall kneel." Ned looked at Littlefinger, who only smirked in return. The trap had closed. The throne room pulsed with silence. Joffrey's small figure looked ridiculous atop the Iron Throne, his feet barely touching the edge of the seat. But there was nothing laughable about the swords pointed at Ned Stark. Gold cloaks lined the hall, their spears raised, not in defense of the law, but in loyalty to the gold that bought them. Cersei stood beside her son, regal, composed, and dangerous. "You stand accused of treason, Lord Stark," she said, her voice calm as a winter lake. "Conspiring to usurp the crown, seizing the queen, threatening the heir." "The heir is illegitimate," Ned said, loud enough for every man in the chamber to hear. "Joffrey Baratheon is no son of Robert. gasps rose from the gathered lords and soldiers. Some looked confused, others afraid, but most were already choosing sides in their minds, counting favors, debts, and swords. "Lies," Joffrey spat. "He lies, mother." Cersei's smile never faltered. "You have no proof." "I have Robert's decree." Ned stepped forward, parchment in hand. He named Stannis as his rightful heir. "This is his royal seal." Cersei didn't even look at the paper. "Tear it in half," she said to Janos Slynt. And just like that, the Lord Commander of the City Watch stepped forward, took the parchment from Ned's hand, and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound echoed like thunder in the vaulted hall. Ned's heart turned to ice. Littlefinger had betrayed him. The gold cloaks had turned. The game was over, and he had lost. But he would not beg. That night, Robert Baratheon woke screaming. The infection in his wound had spread. Maester Pycelle muttered about rot and fever, but the truth was simple. The king was dying, and fast. His body trembled, soaked in sweat, and his words were nonsense, half remembrances of Lyanna, half drunken prayers to gods that no longer listened. Renly sat at his brother's bedside, fists clenched. "We need to get him out of the city." Barristan shook his head. "He won't survive the journey. We can't move him. He's the only thing keeping this from collapsing," Renly hissed. "If he dies tonight, Cersei wins." But Pycelle, useless as ever, simply murmured about herbs and leeches. Robert groaned, his eyes flickering open for a moment. He looked at Renly, truly looked, and whispered, "Don't let them take it. Don't let her win." Then he slipped under again. Ned Stark was thrown into the black cells beneath the Red Keep, where the air stank of rot and damp stone. The guards said nothing. They brought no food, only silence and darkness. He didn't know how long he lay there, hours, maybe days. The pain in his leg from being thrown down the steps throbbed steadily, and the weight of his failure pressed heavier than any wound. He had trusted too easily. He had hesitated too long. And now, all of it, Winterfell, Robert, the realm, was falling apart. Then one night a soft scrape broke the silence. A key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and a hooded figure slipped inside. It was Varys. "My lord," he whispered, kneeling beside Ned, "there is still a path forward, but you must bend." Ned's voice was hoarse. "I will not lie. I will not name Joffrey king. If you do not," Varys said, "they will kill you. And then they will kill your daughters." That made Ned's head snap up. "Arya, Sansa. Sansa is still in the Red Keep unharmed, for now. Arya escaped before the chaos. We believe she's in the city, hiding. But if you die, Lord Stark, you die a traitor. Your house will fall. The North will burn." Ned closed his eyes. "Robert's dying, isn't he?" Varys didn't answer. He didn't need to. By dawn, a raven flew from King's Landing toward Dragonstone. It carried only 7 words. "The king is dead. War begins at once." And as Robert Baratheon took his final breath, alone and broken in his bed, Cersei Lannister stepped into the throne room once again and declared her son the rightful king of Westeros. The council was hers. The gold cloaks were hers. The city for now was hers. But across the narrow sea, Stannis Baratheon read the raven's message in silence, and his jaw tightened like stone. In the north, Robb Stark read his father's last letter and ordered the march south to begin. And in the dungeons below the Red Keep, Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, faced a choice that would shape the fate of kingdoms: bend the knee or die with honor. Ned Stark sat on the cold stone bench, hands folded in his lap, wrists bruised from chains. The cell was dark except for the faint torchlight spilling in from the hallway. Time had slowed to a crawl. He no longer counted the days, only the mistakes. He had been a fool. Too slow, too honest. Too bound to honor in a place that fed on betrayal. And now his daughters were pawns. Sansa a hostage. Arya missing in a city of knives. His death would not be clean. It would be a message. Cersei wouldn't just kill him. She'd make it look just. Legal, righteous. The North would burn before a blade was ever drawn. The door opened again, quietly. It was Varys, as always. Ned looked up. "More riddles, Spider?" "No riddles," Varys replied. "Only a simple truth. Cersei has offered you a choice." Ned waited. "You confessed to treason. Say you lied. Admit that Joffrey is the rightful heir. Swear fealty. And you live. Ned's face hardened. And if I refuse? You die, publicly, your head on a spike, and your daughter will watch. Ned's mouth went dry. He had survived war. He had faced down kings and traitors. But this was different. This was poison wearing a crown, dressed in ceremony and masks. I won't say Joffrey is king. He isn't, and Robert knew it. Dead men don't argue, Varys said gently. Lived ones protect their family. That cut deeper than any sword. Above them the throne room was being prepared. Cersei stood beside Joffrey as servants laid down fresh banners, replacing the stag with the lion. The court would be assembled by noon. A public confession, a royal pardon, a show of mercy. All staged like theatre. Joffrey, bored already, fiddled with the hilt of his new sword. I want to see his face when he kneels, the boy said, grinning. Cersei touched his shoulder. He'll kneel. For his daughters. And if he didn't, well, there were other ways to make a Stark bleed. In the Red Keep's guest chambers, Sansa sat in silence. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She had begged the Queen to spare her father. Written letters, fallen to her knees, and for all her tears, she had been told only one thing: if he loves you, he will kneel. She didn't know where Arya was. Maybe she'd escaped the city. Maybe she was dead. She couldn't even cry for her sister anymore. She was empty. She had nothing left except a single hope, that her father would choose her life over his pride. Back in the black cells, Ned leaned his head against the wall. Every fiber of his soul screamed against it. The truth mattered. Justice mattered. The crown should not rest on lies. But then he saw Sansa's face in his mind. Arya's laugh in Winterfell. Robb's proud stance. Jon at the wall, Bran broken and still climbing in his dreams. And he saw Catelyn, waiting for a man who might never come home. He had failed them all, but maybe he could still protect them. I'll do it, he whispered, voice cracking. I'll say the words. Varys nodded once, quietly, and vanished back into the dark. The crowd gathered like vultures under the midday sun. The great sept of Baelor was packed with lords, small folk and soldiers alike. The city was buzzing with rumors. Some claimed Ned Stark had tried to poison Joffrey, others that he had plotted with Stannis to usurp the throne. Truth had long since drowned in gossip. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, draped in red and gold. Beside him, Cersei watched the proceedings with careful eyes. Littlefinger stood just behind her, always in reach, always silent. Ned Stark was dragged out by gold cloaks, thinner than they remembered, limping slightly, head held high. He stood on the platform, eyes scanning the crowd until they found Sansa. She was crying again. He hated what he was about to do. The High Septon stepped forward, unrolling the royal decree. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, Warden of the North. You stand accused of high treason. How do you answer these charges? Ned looked up, his voice low but clear. I am guilty. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cersei's mouth curved into a smile. I conspired against the throne, Ned said. I lied about Joffrey's birth. He is the true heir of King Robert. I beg mercy. The words felt like ash in his mouth. But Sansa nodded through her tears, and Ned closed his eyes for a moment, letting that be enough. Joffrey rose from the throne, smug with power. My mother says to let him live, the boy said loudly. But I am the king now, and a traitor does not deserve mercy. Cersei's head snapped toward him. Joffrey, I want his head. The world stopped. Sansa screamed. Cersei stood, fury on her face, but the gold cloaks were already moving. Sir Elyn Payne stepped forward, greatsword in hand. The crowd roared. Some cheered, some wept, and as the blade fell, Varys turned away. The sept of Baelor was still echoing with screams when the body was dragged away. Sansa collapsed to the stone floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her pale hands shaking as the blood of her father stained the steps. Cersei shouted for the guards to contain her, but even her voice was drowned by the chaos. Some in the crowd screamed in horror. Others chanted Joffrey's name as if he was some god of war. Joffrey watched it all with wide, gleaming eyes. The boy who had just ordered a man's execution like it was a game. He looked down at Sansa, grinning. Maybe I'll put his head on a spike outside your window, he said. So you can remember what happens to traitors." Cersei spun on him, slapping him hard across the face. "You stupid boy," she hissed. "Do you know what you've done?" Joffrey blinked, shocked. "I'm the king. You've declared war on the North." Arya Stark watched it all from the shadows. She had climbed through the rafters of the sept, hiding among the stone gargoyles, rats, and dust. She hadn't eaten in days, hadn't spoken to anyone. Yoren of the Night's Watch had tried to find her, but she slipped away again and again. She had come to see her father. Instead, she saw his death. She didn't cry. Not right away. She didn't scream. She just stared. Her heart froze, then cracked into something sharp and hollow. When the executioner raised the sword, she turned away. By the time the blade hit, Arya was gone. News of Ned Stark's death rode the raven's wings north. At Winterfell, Robb Stark read the letter in silence. The words blurred through tears he refused to let fall. The fire in the great hall burned low, casting shadows on the ancient walls as the lords of the north waited for him to speak. Maester Luwin stood beside him, pale and shaking. "He confessed," the letter said. "He admitted to treason and was sentenced to death by the king." "Confessed," Robb whispered, voice thin. "My father would never confess. Not unless—" He looked up, eyes fierce now. "They made him. They broke him. And then they killed him anyway." Lord Umber slammed his fist on the table. "No more letters. No more talk. We ride." The room erupted. Karstark, Glover, Manderley, they all shouted for blood, for war, for vengeance. Robb rose from his chair. "Summon the bannermen." We marched south. Catelyn Stark received the news at River Run. The Raven came just after dawn. She was sitting by her father's sickbed when Maester Vyman brought it to her. She broke the seal slowly, carefully, as if the letter itself might fall apart in her hands. Then she read the words. Her face didn't change. Not at first. She just closed her eyes and let the grief spread like wildfire through her chest. When she opened them again, she was no longer a mother waiting for peace. She was a widow, a wolf, a fury. She burned the letter without saying a word. In the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister smiled faintly when he heard the news. So it had come to that. The boy had drawn first blood, and now the game had changed. The Starks would not forgive. The North would rise. But Tywin didn't fear the North. He feared hesitation, and Cersei had hesitated too long. Now the boy king had forced everyone's hand. "Send word to Jaime," Tywin said to a waiting squire. "Tell him to meet the river lords with fire and steel. And tell him no more prisoners." On the road to King's Landing, Stannis Baratheon's ships finally touched land. He stood at the prow of the lead galley, jaw tight, eyes scanning the horizon. The Raven had arrived just before they set sail. Robert was dead. Cersei ruled. And Joffrey had murdered Lord Eddard Stark. It was treason. It was madness. And it was the perfect moment. He turned to Davos. "Gather the captains. We march on the capital. You have fewer men than you hoped for," Davos warned. "I have law," Stannis replied coldly. "I have truth. That will be enough." In the alleys of Flea Bottom, Arya crept like a shadow through the filth and crowds, her dirty cloak pulled tight over her face. She stole bread with a dagger she barely knew how to hold. She slept in cellars, gutters, and crypts. She didn't speak her name. She didn't look at the Red Keep. She remembered her father's words. "The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." So she became a wolf, a quiet one, a watching one. Yoren finally caught her outside the mudgate, dragging her by the arm into a cart filled with boys, heading north for the wall. "Best hide that hair, girl," he muttered. "You're no highborn anymore." "I'm not a girl," she whispered. "I'm no one." And so the Game of Thrones turned red. Ned Stark's death was not the end. It was the beginning. The wolves were loose. The lions were hunting, and winter, true, cold, merciless winter, was finally coming for the Seven Kingdoms. The drums of war beat loud in the Riverlands. Robb Stark rode at the front of 20,000 northern men, the dire wolf of House Stark flying high over the banners of the Karstarks, Umbers, Manderleys, Boltons, and others who had answered the call. Steel gleamed under cloudy skies, and for the first time in a century, the south would see the wrath of the north. At Moat Cailin, Where the neck narrowed the land to a choke point, Robb gave his first command: "No prisoners unless I say otherwise. Tywin Lannister will not spare our kin, and we will not kneel." The men roared, shouting his name like thunder rolling down the hills. But in the privacy of his tent, away from the bravado and banners, Robb was quieter, younger, less certain. His hand trembled slightly as he read another raven from Riverrun. Jaime Lannister had begun burning the Riverlands. Catelyn Stark stood atop the ramparts of Riverrun, watching black smoke rise in the distance. Towns were being razed, small folk slaughtered. Jaime Lannister, with his golden armor and cruel smile, had turned the Tullylands into a message. One by one, river lords were being crushed beneath the weight of the Lannister army. Her father, Lord Hoster Tully, lay dying. Her brother Edmure tried to rally what forces he could, but it wasn't enough. When the raven from Robb arrived, her hands shook. He was coming. Her son, now a commander of thousands, was marching to war. But the boy she raised was gone. This was Robb the Lord, Robb the Avenger. She found herself praying that the cost would not be too high. South of the Trident, Jaime Lannister camped beside a burned village, polishing his sword as if the screams of its people hadn't just faded into the wind. He barely looked up as Ser Adam Marbrand approached. "Scouts say the Stark boy marches fast. He's heading for the twins." Jaime smirked. "He'll have to kneel to that old vulture, Walder Frey, to cross the river." "That'll slow him," Adam hesitated. "And if it doesn't?" "Then we finally get to see if the wolf has teeth," Jaime said, sheathing his blade. "And if not, I'll send his head back to his mother with a Lannister ribbon tied around it." But Robb Stark didn't kneel. He bargained. The twins, home of House Frey, guarded the only safe crossing across the Green Fork. Lord Walder Frey was ancient, arrogant, and treacherous, but he loved power. So Robb made a deal. "I'll marry one of your daughters," he said, his voice steady. "Not today. Not tomorrow, but when the war is done." Catelyn warned him not to promise his heart so easily, but Robb's face was set in steel. "If I don't cross, the Riverlands fall. And father died for nothing." The gates opened. The Stark army poured through, and war thundered south. By the time Jaime Lannister realized what had happened, it was too late. Robb struck hard and fast, splitting his army in two. One half engaged Jaime's scouts at the Whispering Wood, drawing him in. The other half came around from the north and crashed into the Lannister camp like a hammer. It was not a battle, it was a trap. In the chaos, grey wind leapt through fire and blade, tearing men from horseback. The Stark bannermen cut down knights who had once laughed at their northern ways. And Robb Stark, young and untested, earned his name in blood. Jaime Lannister was dragged from his horse, snarling, his golden armor dented and stained red. Robb stood over him, sword in hand, eyes cold. "Your father sent you to crush us," he said. "Now you'll sit in chains while we ride for his throat." In Riverrun's great hall, Catelyn stood face to face with her son and the Kingslayer. Jaime knelt, bound and gagged, glaring at her with wild lion's eyes. "You have him," she said, her voice low. "But we are still losing." Robb didn't understand at first. "Tywin Lannister is no fool," she continued. "He'll raise another army. March on us before we can regroup. We can't hold the Riverlands forever. We need allies." Robb looked at her, frustrated. "And where do you suggest we find them?" Her answer came with pain. "Renly Baratheon. He's declared himself king in the south. He has Highgarden behind him. He has numbers." Robb's jaw tightened. "Stannis is the true heir." Father believed that. "And father is dead," Catelyn snapped. "We are not here for Stannis or Renly. We are here for your sisters, for Winterfell, for our blood." The silence after that was thick and bitter. Robb turned away. "I will consider it." That night the northern lords gathered around a fire. The banners of the wolf flapped high, but their eyes were full of uncertainty. Lord Karstark stood and shouted, "We named him King in the North." Others joined in. "The King in the North! The King in the North!" Robb heard them, but felt the weight of it all pressing on his shoulders. He had won a great battle, but the war was only just beginning. The war drums had quieted, but only for a moment. Jaime Lannister was in chains, the Riverlands had been reclaimed, and the men of the North sang of victory. They called Robb Stark King in the North, hoisting their cups and shouting his name beneath starless skies. But Robb didn't celebrate, not truly. Victory was a mask. Behind it, the realm was still in flames. His father was dead. His sisters were captives, and the Iron Throne was no closer to justice than before. He stood alone on the battlements of River Run, wind biting at his cloak, watching the river roll black beneath the moonlight. Catelyn approached quietly, her eyes tired, her grief permanent. "You won the battle," she said gently, "but you've yet to win the war." "I know. Then we must decide where the next blow falls." Robb didn't answer at first. His thoughts were tangled. Renly with his southern army, Stannis claiming Dragonstone, King's Landing in the grip of a child tyrant. The Lannisters had not been broken. They had been provoked. Tywin was still out there, waiting. Catelyn's voice was softer now. "If we want peace, we need leverage. Jaime Lannister may be our only chance," Robb turned sharply. "You're not saying we free him?" "No, I'm saying we trade him. For Sansa, for both your sisters." He stared at her, jaw set. "And trust Cersei Lannister to keep her word." "She might, if she wants her golden son back badly enough." In King's Landing, Sansa Stark stared at her reflection in a polished mirror, her face thinner now, paler, older. Every day she recited the same lies in front of courtiers and lords, that Joffrey was a good king, that her father was a traitor, that she was loyal. But her heart had become stone. Joffrey paraded around the court with his crown too big for his head, ordering beatings, punishments, and petty cruelties. One day he promised to wed her. The next, he threatened to have her whipped. And she smiled through it all. Because that was the game, the only way to survive in a city ruled by lions. But then the message came from the north, quiet, hidden, delivered by a maid who said nothing and vanished just as quickly. "The wolf lives. The pack marches. Hope endures." Sansa read it again and again. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply folded it, tucked it under her sleeve, and began to plan. Arya Stark was heading north, or so she hoped. Disguised as a boy named Arry, she traveled with Yoren's ragged band of recruits for the Night's Watch, dirt on her face and vengeance in her heart. Every day she whispered the names under her breath like a prayer: Cersei, Joffrey, Ilyn Payne, the Hound. The road was long. The nights were cold. But Arya had learned one thing since her father died. Mercy was a weakness. She sharpened her blade each night, holding it tight as she slept. She had no throne to chase, no banners to rally. She had only her list. At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stood in silence as the Red Woman spoke beside the fire. "You are the rightful king," Melisandre whispered. "Born of king's blood, chosen by the Lord of Light. Then why do my banners dwindle?" Stannis asked, bitterness in his voice. "Why do men flock to Renly and not to me? Because they worship false gods, false kings. But they will burn, and you will rise." She stepped closer, firelight dancing in her eyes. "The Wolf King cannot win the throne. He serves the old gods and a dying cause. He is vengeance wrapped in honor." Stannis turned away, jaw clenched. He had no love for the boy in the north. But perhaps they could burn each other to ash and leave the field to him. Back at River Run, the council was split. Some demanded they march on King's Landing. Others urged alliance with Renly or Stannis. The Greatjon roared for war. The Blackfish warned of strategy. Catelyn, always calm, reminded them of the cost. Then the Raven came. Not from Renly, not from Stannis, but from Balon Greyjoy. The Iron Islands were rising. Balon had crowned himself king of salt and rock. He had sent ships to raid the western shores. And worse, he had summoned Robb's own foster brother Theon Greyjoy to Pike. Robb crushed the parchment in his hand. "They all want crowns," he muttered, "while my sisters rot in chains." He stood before his lords, his voice hard. "We ride for the Westerlands. We burn Casterly Rock. We force the lion to roar and bleed." The men cheered, but Catelyn said nothing. She saw it clearly now. The game wasn't just about thrones. It was about survival. The North would not be given peace. It would have to take it. With fire, with blood, or not at all.